Let me show you how I take this pallet wood tabletop and turn it into this. Quite a difference, wouldn't you say? But with a few steps, it's an easy process anyone can do. Let me show you how I did it. Thanks for tuning in to the Woodshop Stop, and stick around to see how I did it. Thanks for tuning in to the Woodshop Stop. If you've been to the channel before, you know this is a familiar spot for me. I often start out with the planer or the jointer when I start out a project. And that's because I'm using pallet wood most of the time and I have to clean up some of the bad areas on the boards. But this project is no different. This is a project that it's kind of an experiment, and but I wanted these boards to be as clean as possible. So I started them out on the planer, and then next I took them over to the jointer just to put a better edge on them for joining the boards together when I do the glue up. And then I trimmed the opposite side. Typical procedure for woodworking if you're going to do a tabletop glue up where you want to join two boards together and you want to have a nice seam. Like I said before, this is an experiment. I'll put together this tabletop using these boards, but then I'll take 1/8-inch plywood that I acquired some time ago, and I'll wrap the tabletop so that it looks totally different than pallet wood boards. And hopefully I can get a nice uniform top with a nice wood grain. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the like button. It helps the algorithm. And share the video as well. That also helps the algorithm. I'd like to grow this channel as much as possible to see how large we can get it and how many people we can reach across the YouTube world. As you can see, I took these over to the miter station and cut them to length. And now it's time to do the glue up, which is pretty basic. Once they're glued, I clamped them all together. Now it's the next day, and the boards are dry, and I'm just going to do a little sanding to knock down some of the high spots and smooth out everything. Now here's a sheet of the plywood that I acquired. I must have got about 30 or 40 of these sheets like this, and I wasn't sure what to do with them, but now is the time for the rubber to meet the road, and we're going to see what we can come up with it. I'm using a paneling blade, which is a 60-tooth blade, and I wanted to use that because that creates less tear out. A standard ripping blade might create too much tear out on the edge, and I don't want raggedy edges on the joint because I'm going to have to glue two of these sheets together. They're not going to be the same size. It's going to be a smaller one and a full-size one. As you can see there, that's the second sheet. Once I got the sheets cut to size, I decided I wanted to put a frame around the table to give it the appearance of a thicker table. It's only 3/4 or less thickness right now, but this will give it over 1.25 inch thickness look to it. So I put 45s on the end of these boards and basically frame the table out. And you'll see this as we go on. There's not much to cutting miters. You just have to remember that your outside dimension is going to be the inside of your miter. So you make your mark at the inside of the miter, which represents the outside dimension that the miter frame is going to go around. But now I got all the pieces cut, and I'll just glue these and brad nail them to the outer edge, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I just want to have some surface area there to glue the plywood pieces to, as you can see. Now I'm cutting the side strips. That would be the edges for the tabletop. Once I got that done, I moved on to the actual top of the table, the piece for the top of the table. And this is where I have to glue the two pieces together to get the full size of the table. And I kind of regretted having to do this, but this is one of those things that you do what you have to do to get the job done, and however it comes out is how it comes out. And if you notice, the grain on this looks like it matches up pretty good. That was by coincidence. I didn't actually plan that, but I took the two best pieces and the pieces that looked the most similar when I decided to use them. And just so happens, even though I cut it in half, the one piece I cut in half, it still came out to match up the existing piece. The next step is to glue the plywood piece onto the pallet wood top. I probably could have used a little bit more glue, and probably should have glued the underside of the plywood as well, or I could have even used contact cement. I know that would be an application that would work well, because that's used for countertops and Formica and that type of thing. I don't know if they do Formica anymore these days, but some people use it in certain situations, I understand. But this seemed to be the most feasible way to do this. Then I added a little weight to it, so I had some clamping power to hold the table or the plywood down onto the pallet wood top. And this is what it looks like afterwards. Now I have to do the edges of the table, which is basically like edge banding, except that I'm going to create a frame to go around the edge. So I need 45s on the ends of these pieces, and here I'm cutting the 45 on one piece, and you can see that it's a little bit different type of cut. And don't worry, I don't have my fingers inside the safety guard, and I'm very cautious about that. I make sure that my fingers stay well enough away from the blade, and the safety guard is there to ensure that you do not get your fingers in there next to the blade. So don't worry, everything's cool here. And the 45s actually came out really nice for the method that I used to cut those. There's a little bit of fraying and chip out on the inside, which doesn't reflect what's going to show on the outside. So then once I got the pieces all cut to size, and then I just glued the edges as though I were doing edge banding. And I used masking tape to act as clamps while the glue dries. As you can see, this is very similar to edge banding. Now I had to make sure that the edge piece was secure to the underside of the top as well. But I think it went together pretty decent for the first time trying something like this. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was definitely a learning experience. I mean, there's not a whole lot of gaps and that kind of thing, so I think it's going to look pretty decent. A lot better than just a pallet wood top would look. I mean, you've got some nice grain and figure in the wood or the project, and I'm pretty happy with it. Once it was all dry, this is what it looked like, and I proceeded to use the router to trim the edge. So now I have a square edge from the top to the edge. And then once I trim the excess, then I put a 45 chamfer or angle on the edge itself, which exposes the interior of the plywood so you have a different color for the angle. And I think that gives it a little more character. And once everything is finished and sealed, I think it should be just fine. I wasn't real sure of how much of a chamfer I wanted on this edge, so I did small incremental adjustments and several passes to acquire the correct width on this angle that I wanted and I thought looked the best. So I make several passes, and I'm glad I did it that way instead of jumping to a large size right off the bat and not being happy with what I've done. So that's why you see the more passes, kind of sneaking up on the actual size that I want for that chamfer. Once we did all that, I did a little sanding off camera, and now it's time for the finish. This is just a polyurethane that I'm using, and as you can see, I'm just brushing it on and trying to get a nice even coat. And this is a semi-gloss, so it's not a high gloss finish. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a sheen there, but I think that came out pretty good. It looks unified on the top. Can hardly see where the seam is that I added. And thanks for watching.